All right, are you able to hear me now? Is that better? Okay, great. Thank you for dealing with that. So the Conservation and Natural Resources element, also known as the CNR element, is part of our general plan. And we're updating it right now to comply with two state legislation, specifically Senate Bill 1425 and Assembly Bill 1889. Senate Bill, or SB 1425, is requiring jurisdictions to update their open space element to consider equitable access to open space, also climate resilience, as well as rewilding opportunities. AB 1889 is requiring jurisdictions to consider how development is affecting wildlife connectivity in our state. And so that is the reason why we are initiating this CNR element update. And also as part of this larger CNR project, we are also updating our parks and recreation element to address that equitable access to open space. And then also we are updating our significant ecological areas ordinance, which are the rules and regulations that apply to our significant ecological areas. And then also our hillside management ordinance. In this piece, this is rules and regulations that apply to areas on kind of like a steeper terrain. So today I'll be talking mostly about this SCA ordinance, since you probably all received the notice, letting you know that your property is within the proposed expansion. So some information as to what is a significant ecological area, or also known as an SCA. These are officially designated areas within the county that contain irreplaceable biological resources and also really contribute to the biodiversity of the county as a whole. These SCAs. Say that one more time.
Like what would be considered a resource?
Yeah, so a lot of the, the natural habitat that you see on, in around the surrounding areas, native vegetation, also includes like protected trees such as Joshua trees, oak trees.
You guys are letting freaking building developers come in and rip down all the Joshua trees, pay a little fee because they ripped one down. But how does that affect the actual homeowners, people that have been here for like a couple generations, people that are just trying to live and not pay taxes and stuff like that? Like, we're only going after the homeowners right now, not the people that are trying to expand.
We're gonna hold the questions, let her get through the presentation, there'll be time for questions. So let her get through the presentation.
Can I make a suggestion? Can you stand here in the middle of the room and speak to everybody in the room instead of looking at the screen and you're talking to that side?
She has to
So we can
read it
all
off
hear
the
you?
screen.
She's got to read it off the screen.
Oh, you're, oh, okay.
Sorry, I know they can't hear that very. Yeah.
It's hard to hear. Do you know?
Okay, so I will defer to the town council. What is the best way to, for me to?
Why don't we have you put in the middle?
Okay.
We'll have a good round, and then that.
Likely to, undisturbed to lightly disturbed habitat, along with linkages and corridors that really promote that species.
I have a question for your natural resources. We're talking about natural resources, animals, everything on private property, right? Not on parks and stuff.
Let her get through the presentation.
We're gonna let her do her presentation, and then we'll have questions. Thank you.
Give her a chance
What's
to
being
do that.
said.
I
Not at
totally get
public parks
it,
or anything like that.
give her a chance to get through.
I can't. Okay, we're gonna wait.
All right. We are here to answer questions afterwards.
I'm gonna request, hold on, folks. Can you speak slower, so I'm trying to take notes personally, so I
Okay.
can ask you questions at the end, that'd be much appreciated.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. All right. zoning overlay. It just shows us where to apply the SCA ordinance, as to, where are these SCAs designated, and then also, how these rules and regulations apply to these designated areas. The SCAs also include private properties, we recognize that. But also, just because you have a designation doesn't mean that your property is automatically protected open space. It doesn't mean that it is a preserve. Those private property rights are still maintained, but it just means that, if development is proposed within an SCA, it would have to go through biological review and possible mitigation for any impacts to biological resources that are considered.
Quiet.
Alright, so I'm gonna continue. Just to give you an overview of what the SCA program is and what those two components are. The first component is our general plan, that CNR element that I just told you about. And that CNR element includes biological resource policies for the county to achieve their conservation, natural resource conservation goals. And then also it includes this SCA policy map. So that is where the boundaries come into play. The boundaries live in this SCA policy map. The other component is our zoning code, which includes that SCA ordinance. These are the rules and regulations that will apply to areas that are designated SCAs. And this ordinance includes the permitting processes, any development standards that, a project will need to meet, and then also has those mitigation requirements in the case where a project is impacting sensitive resources. So some background of the SCA program. This program has been existing for 50 years. In 1976, the county commissioned its first SCA study, and the SCAs that kind of resulted from that study, were smaller sized, generally surrounded by undeveloped areas. But, soon, the county found out that it wasn't really sustaining the SCAs, and therefore a second study was commissioned in 2000. So, resulting from this 2000 study, larger blocks of SCAs were designated to ensure that, the health of the SCAs and the biological resources were sustained, and as well as, just also taking into consideration, connectivity as part of the larger biodiversity ecosystem of the county.
Could you please define connectivity?
Maybe if we could answer that at the end, that would be great.
Can you talk a little louder, please?
Louder?
No, they're saying they don't.
louder, I can't
What
hear you back
are
here.
you using the term connectivity?
Connectivity, okay, so connectivity means, making sure that, habitat that species use are, somewhat contiguous so that they are able to travel from one point to another.
What about us? Are we
Um,
not habitat? We're not species?
They were here when you built
More
that.
about the rats than human beings.
Alright, alright, so what, so I'm sure everyone has seen the proposed SCA boundaries. I'm just gonna give you an overview of what was proposed. These proposed boundaries are based on the 2025 SCA study results. Expansions are proposed in both unincorporated areas of the county, including incorporated areas countywide. There are no proposed reductions of existing SCAs. Also, large blocks of habitat, like the National Forest, Angeles National Forest, and portions of Los Padres National Forest are proposed as new SCAs. And then also for larger housing development, if subdivision projects, if if a subdivision project reached a recorded final map phase, then open space designated, open space in that recorded map was designated as SCA if those biological resources were present. And then for pending subdivisions, we designated the whole project area as SCA if biological resources are present. So here on the screen and on your slide, we have the 7 SCA selection criteria. So the designation of these proposed, SCAs, whether they're deemed for expansion, they were based on the 7 SCA selection criteria. So you needed to meet one of these in order to be proposed as an SCA. And so the first 6, so from A through F, the first 6 criteria is actually from our very first SCA study. They were carried on over each SCA study, and we also used them to as part of our designation process. The last criterion G, was added to address AB 1889, which required jurisdictions to look into and address how development affects wildlife connectivity. Here is just a screenshot of our map, our web map on our website. So you can go to this web map to see if your property is within the proposed expansion area. And you can put in your address, your parcel number, and then on the right-hand screen, if you click on your parcel, it will provide you with the justification from the SCA study as to why this area was designated or proposed as an SCA. And then on the left hand,
Is that the green area?
Yes.
yes, the green
So
area.
basically all that. Yeah.
Well, last time I looked on the website, you really couldn't see streets or anything. It was so vague.
Okay. And then on the left-hand side, we have a comment form where you can submit your comments. This is just one way to submit your comments.
Has the map been fixed because, the interactive map didn't work the last time I checked it?
Okay.
So I did a lot of research and even saw online, a lot of comments to that, does it work, does it work, does it work?
Yes.
So one of the, you guys have all the resources, we wanna make sure that map is working, so we can make sure we stay financial, because we have some impact. So I guess yes or no, is the map working?
It was working for me. I'm not, I can't say for other people because I don't have access to your computer. But if maybe we can talk afterwards and see, we can try to troubleshoot, what is that, what is going on, whether we have to allow for some pop-ups. But we can talk afterwards and see if we can troubleshoot that.
And we can also do a live demo as well too, just to make sure, we're seeing the same things when the link is clicked on. So we're happy to do that at the end of this presentation as well.
We're gonna hold questions, we really wanna try to get through this, so you guys can have all the time to ask as many questions as you can.
Okay.
I'm trying to see where the packet is.
Oh,
You guys are all out.
Yeah. And we can send you the presentation. In terms of how, how this all affects, you and your property, we are going to go through several scenarios, depending on, how a property owner is proposing to use their property, and then also, maybe some future development they want to propose. So if you have a vacant parcel and you're not proposing any development at this moment, then the ordinance wouldn't apply to you at that time. It really kicks in when you are proposing to build something on your property. If you have that vacant parcel, yes, yeah, and we'll get to that scenario. Yeah. So for this vacant parcel, if you're not proposing any development, then vegetation on this parcel should not be disturbed or removed if it's not associated with mandatory defensible space requirements.
What about gardening and fruit trees?
We're doing this at the end.
For there are some scenarios where, you know, the SCA ordinance will apply depending on the type of activity you are doing on your property. So if you're doing vegetation removal of native habitat, that's not associated with defensible space, then, that could potentially trigger the SCA ordinance. Any grading of undisturbed areas containing native vegetation, if you need to do exploratory well drilling, if you are proposing any temporary uses where, you know, vegetation will be removed or you're proposing some structure. Farming is also an activity where the SCA ordinance may apply. And then, and green waste sites. Here's a scenario where where you have an existing development and you want to maintain your property. So you're not proposing anything new on your property, but you just want to maintain it and use it the way it exists today. One thing to note is that the SCA ordinance does not apply retroactively to existing development. So if you have your existing home, you're not doing anything to it, we're not going to make you, you know, bring it up to, you know, a certain standard because your property is now designated SCA. We have exemptions where certain activities will, we have exemptions where certain activities will, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. All right, so we have certain exemptions where the SCA ordinance will not apply. So these activities include annual defensible space clearance as required by the fire department. You know, there's also annual weed abatement or brush clearance as required by the Agricultural Commissioner Weights and Measures Department. If you have any driveway or private road maintenance that you need to do, so maybe you have a dirt road, every rainy season it washes out and you need to resurface it or regrade it. So that activity doesn't require a review or permit from us. If you need to do any sort of emergency tree removal of protected trees, if it's an emergency and, you know, it's really, you know, going to be affecting the health and safety of people and of property, then, you know, you can go, you don't need that permit from us. You may possibly need a permit from the county forestry, especially if you have an oak tree in certain situations, or maybe a permit from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife if you have a Joshua tree. If you are doing tree maintenance and, you know, just regular pruning of your trees, then you don't need that permit from us. If you need to remove non-native trees, then, you know, you can go ahead and remove that non-native tree. And then also if you're doing any like-for-like replacements, so for example, you know, your fence, you know, you need to replace your fence and you're replacing it with a like-for-like, then no need to come to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So here is a graphic of just, you know, what the defensible space zones are, and I'm pretty sure you guys are very well versed, you know, in defensible space. I'm just putting it out here so that you can see, you know, what are the typical requirements within each zone, and then also, you know, to emphasize that you don't need a permit from regional planning if you are doing brush clearance or vegetation removal for annual defensible space. If you have a vacant parcel and you want to propose new construction, so we are requiring pre-application counseling for all new development that is proposed.
He's a psychiatrist.
So this, you know, what we want to do is to really, you know, help guide the design of your project so that it, you know, we are able to avoid or you know, just lessen the impact to sensitive biological resources on site.
You always say we, and who is we in your eyes?
Sir, we've already told you, we're waiting till the
I know,
end.
but she says we.
No, we are
Who is
we.
we?
Yeah, we the department, we the
The
department.
department, and we're the private route.
Okay, so there are two, permit pathways if you are,
Terms need to be defined so we understand what she's talking
We have the right at the end to let her finish her demonstration, and then we will address you and him. No, sir, there's no
It's a
game.
meeting, it's the meeting.
Meeting and they can clarify what she's saying. She can't talk here without somebody clarifying what she's saying. That's all she's doing. He's not asking the question, just clarify what she's saying.
No, there.
No, it's not. Let her talk, let him ask questions.
Okay. You need to chill.
Thank you.
So, you need to chill.
You need to chill. You're jumping on people's faces and asking for questions.
They won't stop talking, okay? They're being disrespectful.
No, we're not.
Yes, they are.
No, you are being disrespectful.
All right.
no, yeah, there is chance for, we're going to answer questions.
Right.
I think it's just best to get through this and then, let's just get to the questions fast.
Right.
Okay?
suggested to write the question down.
We're trying to tell them.
All right, so, where was I? Okay, so you have vacant parcel and you want to propose new construction. We do have two permanent pathways. One is a ministerial SCA review. This is a faster review. It is less costly, compared to the other one. And there's no public hearing, involved in this. The goal is to really minimize the impact to sensitive resources by incorporating all of the applicable development standards. The other pathway is our our SCA conditional use permit. This is a longer review, it's more costly, and public hearing is required. This is for projects that have a bigger footprint, maybe they're unable to avoid the most sensitive resources on site, or you have to provide that mitigation for whatever you impacted. All right, so for existing development, this comes to Jackie's scenario where you have an existing development and you want to add to your property. You may want to do like a house addition, or you want to build a new garage. Those type of scenarios. Just to note, the SCA ordinance doesn't apply to that existing portion of your home. It only really applies to what you are proposing as new. We do have an exemption where if you are able to meet, these kind of like thresholds or requirements, then, you don't need to go through the SCA review process. And that is, so for addition or modifications to single-family residences, if you are able to keep your building site area to a maximum of 15,000 square feet, and if if you have trees on your property, the new portion doesn't encroach into less than 10% of the drip line of 4 or less SCA protected trees. So if you're able to meet that, then you don't need to go through the SCA review process. If you are not able to meet one of these, thresholds, if you're not able to meet the tree threshold, then the permit pathways available are the ministerial SCA review or the SCA conditional use permit. If you are exceeding that building site area threshold, then the pathway is the SCA conditional use permit. You may be asking what is counted towards a building site area. So this graphic on the screen is just to illustrate the difference between like what's considered a building site area versus like what we consider the development footprint. So the building site area includes the building pad, any graded slopes, structures, decks, patios, paved or impervious surfaces, and then also ornamental landscaped areas. We also have several, criteria or situations where things won't be counted towards your BSA. So that is a 20-foot wide by 300-foot long portion of your driveway. Any required turnaround that the fire department says you must put in, any graded graded slopes associated with that, you know, portion of the driveway or that turnaround that's required. And then also the fuel modification area is not counted towards your building site area. And then if you have any, if you wanna propose any non-structural, you know, animal keeping areas, then, you know, in order for that to not be counted toward the building site area, it needs to be located in a space where grading is not required, and then also, in an area that's already previously disturbed. So, you know, in terms of what those development standards could be, you know, I talked a lot about, you know, how we're trying to minimize impacts to biological resources, and we do have, you know, certain thresholds in there, in that SCA ordinance. I also wanted to just highlight some other development standards that are more design-based. So these are, you know, an open design fencing that is, that you can put on the perimeter of your property. So this, fencing design needs to be wildlife permeable. You know, avoiding and planting any invasive plants in your landscape. If you are proposing any, you know, outdoor lighting, you know, we require them to be low and shielded down. And then also for windows, the windows need to be non-reflective to prevent bird strings. Also, if you have any, so temporary uses, you know, so if you have, you know, if you do have a lot of filming activity in your community, we do have a process for temporary filming. So, you know, temporary filming is not considered a development type in that SCA ordinance, and it doesn't require a permit from our department. These temporary filming requests are submitted by Film LA, so, you know, the production company will work with Film LA to, you know, to send over the plans to us. And what we do is, you know, we look at the plans from Film LA, and then we just provide best management practices to be used during that film shoot. So these best management practices may include, you know, designated parking areas, trying to focus the activities in already disturbed areas. We ask for no explosions, maybe no digging of trenches, and then also no construction of permanent structures for this temporary filming activity. So I am at the end of my presentation.
Alright, so hold on, we're gonna do this orderly, so people raise their hands, we'll call on you, we'll talk over each other, and we're gonna try to get everybody that we can get through. Start your hand first.
First of all, I'd like to say I'm disturbed that properties in existing designated C areas were not sent letters or notifications, whereas the existing C ordinance exempted the single-family residences previously.
Yeah.
Secondly, I'd like a definition of what is equitable access.
Yeah, so equitable access, it really is pertaining to public parks. So not necessarily equitable access to private property, but that is what is part of that SB 1425. So we just need to figure out how to provide, you know, allow for ways to provide access to public parks.
Does this ordinance require you to, and have recorded at the county recorder designating in perpetuity that your property, that at least 1/3 of your property will remain undisturbed? And that recordation goes into, not only the county recorder, but as a land trust or to a land trust in perpetuity?
Yeah, so, you know, what you're talking.
It's half.
It is not half. It is depending on what you propose and what you are impacting.
So basically, you're taking private property and there's no change in taxes. People who have lived on their property and paid their taxes for the last 30 years, you're taking their property, saying that they can't use it for how they want to use it, and and you're taking away the property, and you're saying that's not gonna affect land, property values?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that is what I'm talking about when we say mitigation. Mitigation is if you are impacting a very sensitive resource, then, we will require maybe a replacement or preservation, maybe at a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1
Okay,
ratio.
I'm sorry, that is incorrect, all right? According to table 2 of the SCA guidelines, it says all development in an SCA will be subject to a minimum 50% set aside requirement unless the development is on farmland or is on land that is already substantially
This is
disturbed.
important, what
If
she's saying.
Category 4 is minimum 1-to-1, okay? And category 5, most of the properties enacted are category 4, okay? They've not been tilled
Yeah.
farms, they're not disturbed.
Yeah.
And it says very clearly on table 2, it is a 1-to-1, that means 50%. So please, people need to understand this, and I think that's why there are so many people here. That-
Correct.
Oh,
that-
they're
Yeah.
If I go on my little, let's say the parcel that's been selected for high school ground, which you have put in the SCA, but that parcel is virtually untouched. And I wanted to put a ranch on it, I wanted to put a corral, a turnout stalls, a whole all around, and that parcel is 20 acres, right? But I want to, or whatever it is, and I want to use 10 acres of it. I need to disturb 10 acres of it, and I have my biologists do the analysis, there's nothing valuable, okay? Except it's undisturbed habitat, so it's category 4. So therefore, it's subject to a 1-to-1, so that means I have to take the 10 acres I modified. Now, I appreciate that you've taken out the driveway, that's very helpful, that's very good, okay? But the rest of it, I have to take the rest, that same amount of area, and set it aside. And it says very clearly on pages, where is it, page 29 and 30, or one of the pages, oh, here it
Okay.
is. It says, you will not be allowed to just leave it undisturbed, the county will compel you, or urge you,
Okay.
to give it to a government agency or a land trust or a conservation.
I'm sorry. Okay, can I?
None of that's in these materials.
Well, okay, so, can I respond?
Yes.
Okay, that is only if you are going through an SCA CUP process. And that's a discretionary process, and it really depends on how much you are impacting. So if you are really impacting 10 acres of category 4, then it is a 1-to-1 replacement. But if you are only impacting, I don't know, 500 square foot of category 4, then that's a 1-to-1. Yeah, but,
Just, on an agricultural land, aren't you allowed to farm the entire land?
Yeah.
On an agricultural land?
Yes, we're agricultural land.
And why?
well,
Can you just farm the entire thing?
okay, so yes, without the SCA designation. With the
So that
SCA
means-
designation,
Okay, can you
then
define
we
as a
will.
planner? Can you define as a planner? Because I'm very familiar with this thing within Florida, in Monroe County,
Okay.
right, in Florida Keys. Very familiar. People are having a financial hard time, very bad time. Can you please define the term illegal regulatory taking? Can you please define that term so everybody understands? Illegal regulatory taking.
That's in Florida, not here.
Okay, so hold on. Let me do this.
No, it's
For
here.
people questions, you're gonna be lined up because it's gonna be too hard to
Constitution.
track of these questions. So come over here, follow line, and then you
Of what it is that you prefer with changes, whatever those changes may be, we welcome those letters. But this is a draft process. Maybe it's a little different from some of the other county processes where projects are proposed, they're explained, but there's no opportunity for engagement and dialogue. This is that opportunity, it is a draft process.
Lady, you're the problem. Go sit down.
With that, I'll go ahead and take the first question.
Jesus.
Alright, so obviously everybody's wondering how they can vote against this.
Sit in your house for the money and then don't answer the questions.
They get a homeowners on the 1-to-1 ratio land that hasn't been developed, but say, grandma passed down to grandson and granddaughter to develop into a ranch. Is that gonna be on the table at all, or are you guys just demanding this with no payback? Because that's not fair, that's literally a land grab, yeah, it's that.
So all policy and regulatory proposals have to go through a hearing process where the Board of Supervisors vote and decide upon whether or not they're going to adopt it. So, it goes through a public hearing process. One, the first phase of this engagement is hearing what the project is, giving us that feedback in order for us to analyze the feedback and make changes, possibly make changes to that proposal. Then, there's likely another draft issued to the community again, saying, we've made revisions, we haven't made revisions, what do you think?
Well, is there a way to outright vote no?
And it goes through an iterative process.
And how do we vote those people out of office that vote for it?
The process for that engagement is now. The additional opportunities for that engagement is at public hearing with the Regional Planning Commission first, and then the Board of Supervisors. This is not like a ballot measure where you vote during the times of yes or no. Unfortunately, because of the legislative process with laws, it has to go through the Board of Supervisors.
But then does it end up going through a legislature process or no? 'Cause
That
that seems highly illegal.
That is that legislative process through the Board of Supervisors. They are the only ones who can enact laws in the county.
Who's the board of supervisors?
Burger.
Where is she right now?
You want her email?
She won't answer.
I've got her direct email.
So after years of, the government not taking control of the forest, we have all these fires that go through here, you guys wanna push this agenda, global warming and bullshit, what's the big problem prior to abandoning the forest? So everything burns, and now you guys wanna get a nice green thumb and grab property or taxes out of that property. It's not right to the property owners, especially third generation here, well before this 14, we gonna rip down the 14 too? That goes down a giant freaking quadruple area, going between Basket Rocks and that side here. You rip that down too, or you just gonna take the private property?
So in terms of defensible space, as Iris had presented, defensible space can be maintained. I want to make sure that that point is very clear to everybody, because I think that's hugely important in this area and through a lot of these areas. Defensible space maintenance is allowed without an additional permit from planning, just the way that you've been doing it for as long as you've been doing it. So there's no additional permit for that.
Another question, for the homeowners that have property right now that you guys are trying to classify as ecological and stuff, could they just go get a tractor right now, cause it's not passed, and, make it usable when you guys have to say no? Yeah. Tractors are pretty cheap right now, you guys.
Proposal, it's not effective until it's adopted by the Board of Supervisors. Register for the email list. We will continually notify everybody of next steps, and any dates that are scheduled of meetings or public hearings.
Okay, I've got a couple questions. So, on vacant land, I understand. Now, if that property is gonna change hands and then people need to cut access roads to that land, because a lot of the acts and all those stuff doesn't have all the proposed maps that the county has futures of. So are those roads that are gonna get cut all classified as roads?
So if it is associated with a proposed house or such, and it is connected to that specific development, like Iris said, that first 300 feet is not counted. If it extends beyond that, yes. However, that's something that you can comment on to say, well, for Acton, we have an unusual situation, or a situation that's different from other communities where we have to build our own private roads. We need those roads, possibly exempted from that process. Maybe that's a comment that you want to submit, if it is, to address the unique circumstances of Acton.
Now, because, like, where I live currently, there's somebody looking to buy behind me. It's all over 10% grade. Action requires, LA County requires concrete. So that requires slope easements and everything of that. So I'm wondering, is that all gonna classify? Because then you have to have 30 feet on each side of the 20-foot wide roadway. Slope easements to get there. So is that all gonna classify under that 15,000 square foot umbrella? Even though it's not on their property, it's just the easement access that has to get brought to them.
So for the easement, the slope easement access, it depends on what it is that's being required by public works, whether or not there's actual physical improvement that's required, or if it's a dedication requirement for slope stability. So it really depends on those unique circumstances that you're talking about.
Okay.
If it's just a dedication as part of that development, no, because you're not disturbing it at all.
Just putting the road in, yes. And then fences as well, that was my question, I'm getting ready to put a whole fence up, so that's gonna be.
Hurry up.
So, if that's 17 feet, would that in the future, be under that?
So you're saying, is it going to affect a future,
Well,
your future installation, or
if I-
somebody else in the future?
If I put I have 7,000 feet of fencing to put up, so is that all gonna be under the SCA, that 15,000 square foot umbrella for disturbed land area? So,
So sorry to cut you off. So it depends on the type of wall that or fence that you're putting in. If you're putting in 7,000 feet of CMU block wall, which is a lot of money, it's gonna be in the millions. Possibly, because you have to do a lot of trenching to get the footing in. If you're doing the split rail, no, because you're probably not going to be impacting any native vegetation. The footholds for those poles are very small.
okay,
The answer is no.
okay. And then my last question is, as far as you guys said to register or to do any of your new construction stuff, do you guys have a building, is it all online? Or how does that work? Are you gonna be another office at the county building that you have to go get?
So it's the same process right now. It sounds like a lot more that's additive, but it's not. It's all nested within the zoning code right now. It literally is just a few more boxes that we're reviewing for when you go through that permitting process. So it's not a different department, it's not a different process, it's not an extra permit either. It's development standards that we're looking at already, similar to the active CSD. That's something that we're looking at when we have to review permits.
My question is, as I understand it, Los Angeles Forest is about 1,050 square miles. You're saying that this is to preserve certain vegetation in different areas, and Los Angeles Forest is like 15 miles down that road. Well, why is the vegetation that needs to be preserved on people's properties?
Yeah.
You want your money?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
So that's a
They
great
wanna be
question.
wild.
That is a great question. So if you look at the Angeles Forest, it's probably not gonna have the same vegetation as what we see in the desert floor or desert. Think about the Joshua trees. You're not gonna see the Joshua trees in the Angeles National Forest. It's different species that we're looking at. And it's the totality of those resources. It's not any one individual resource.
So you're saying that the species that's 15 miles down the road is not available to this city?
Not necessarily. Not
I
necessarily.
mean,
And vice versa.
do you want to buy our properties and then keep the vegetation on our properties and the public making it public land?
Yeah, you said that we're gonna be required to have a biologist, determine whether or not, we can get structures built with the permits, right?
No, not.
So, see the biological impact that's gonna have.
And that's a great question. If I can talk about that a little more just to describe the process.
Well, I
So-
haven't gotten my question. You're not a biologist, right? You're gonna have a biologist make these determinations, but at how high of a cost is it gonna cost us as the people who are trying to build on top of the structure? On top of all the permits that we have to get from the city already, how much is it gonna cost to have a biologist determine whether or not we can build it?
So the permitting process is largely the same. The one added step in this process is that essentially the biological inventory for this counseling session. You get to hire the biologist, so it depends on.
Oh, yeah,
student
questions on here?
who's looking for resources with a magnifying glass necessarily, so you just wanna make sure, they know what they're doing. So it depends on the size of the project. If you imagine somebody who has to survey 5,000 square feet versus 50 acres, that cost is gonna be different just because of their time that they're spending. Looking at 5,000 square feet again versus 50 acres. So it really does range.
What would be your best estimate? If you were to, if you were to take, like, I don't know, 500 square feet, right? If you were to hire a biologist in order to do something, what would you estimate would be that? Based on a person who has I'm assuming a bachelor's degree they have to have at least, if not a master's?
So what we can do is follow up with the town council, we can do a survey of our certified biologists to see what their hourly rates are, to give you an idea of what that cost is.
Can you put that in the website?
As you know, running a farm can be pretty challenging, just by itself. And so Bloom Ranch, over 250 acres, we rely upon agritourism. People come there to walk around, so we have established trails. We have people come from LA to come and get the open space. We have some small events. They taste some of the peaches, and you mentioned farming. How is that gonna affect the 5,000 peach trees we have there right now that have been there for like almost 100 years? Is that gonna be impacted by what you're talking about?
Firstly, thank you for keeping up Bloom Ranch. I was lucky enough to have the privilege of meeting with Ray Billett many years ago. Sweet Bert, lots of energy first meeting him, and soon we became pretty good friends and great communicators with each other. Iris pointed out, and maybe we didn't get to that part of the presentation, but for existing farms, if you've been ranching, farming for a long time, there's no changes that's going to affect you from this ordinance if you are continually farming. Even if you're doing crop rotations, and we can see that historically that property has been farmed, again, there's no retroactive regulations that we're gonna go back through and apply.
What about greenhouses?
Other than the fact that our currently agriculturally zoned
Again,
property.
it is already there,
Yes.
and you can see it in the aerial imagery, it's a part of your farming activity. Here, again, we're not going back to
So, with existing trails, that are there, people walk the trails, that is that one, when we decided we just wanted to add another trail somewhere that we go through a congressional hearing, to add another walking trail.
Yes.
So in terms of the use of the property, it really comes down to the amount of changes that you're looking to make, and also whether or not it's going through what we're considering native, largely undisturbed areas for a long period of time. There are a lot of areas on a property that has been used extensively over decades. You can see that in the aerial imagery, you recognize that. So it kind of comes down to those proposals. I think we talk a lot about what ifs and prospective things that we're thinking about. So it really depends, because if you're talking about a trail that is connecting, let's say, the wash area to an existing trail that's all of 20 feet, you're probably not gonna come into us. If we're talking about 2 miles of trail around the perimeter of the property, through the property, we don't know, because we need to know if, there's a federally listed species that may have habitat in there, or even the golden eagle has been found inactive. So it depends.
And last question, what about mobile homes, like, airstreams? We have airstream, or people can bring an airstream there, they won't leave there for a couple of months, things like that. Is that going to impact anything? For example, we do have airstreams here now, and they've been there for several years. So is that what we thought about, maybe we can put an airstream somewhere else in existing places where people kind of gather?
especially if they're habitable structures, they should have gone through the permitting process.
No, that's false, because some of our properties are older than the permitting process.
Sure, and there may be.
The crowd is saying that they can't hear, and the person is over there, you're over here.
Let me back it up.
We'd like you, if you're asking a question, to come in the center, ask your question, and then she can somehow make it so that everybody back there can hear. Just a suggestion.
So you represent the county.
The question is whether or not we represent the county, yes.
Yes, so.
And the high-speed rail.
In these types of programs, these types of meetings, there's a lot of buzzwords thrown around. There's a lot of terms in all of this material. My actual question is, in terms of how the county views the two words, your property versus our property. Why is there no distinction if the county doesn't buy your property to live in and you buy property to live in, then how is it the same? How is our property versus your property the same thing?
So maybe, do you have a question about the ordinance or the?
I just have a question about the terms and the way they're perceived by county officials. Do they distinguish the terms your property versus our property?
So we'll make that adjustment accordingly so that when we reference our, maybe perhaps it's county-owned property. And in terms of your, we speak about the general your community because it is your community.
Okay, but I'm not paying for the community to live anywhere. I'm paying for me to live somewhere. So it's not their property, is it? It's not her property or his property that I live on. So how is the definition of your property considered by the county? If they're going to do stuff or make you do something with your property, how is that even legal?
Because it's part of the zoning code, and as a part of the government code, zoning is allowed in California. So in order to permit any use in California, in Los Angeles County specifically, we have a zoning code that we have to administer, because that's been adopted by law by the Board of Supervisors.
And last question, if there are zoning codes, whenever the zoning codes started, if people are living in areas that never had zoning codes before, but now are asked to comply with a rearranged, redesigned, reimagined zoning code, how is that even legal? And where does it say in the Constitution of the United States that people don't have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? It's a zoning law.
Been here for a very, very long time. The Acton CSD is a part of the zoning code. So to my knowledge, we have to go back in history quite a while to identify areas that didn't have zoning codes. But today, every single property that is in Los Angeles County has some sort of zoning or land use designation on it, unless it is a freeway. Or some other major infrastructure like a freeway that doesn't have zoning, but even then we have.
What is the end goal of changing zoning codes? What's the end goal? What is the reason for doing so? If you're protecting biological resources, are we not biological resources?
And that's fair, and there's a lot of zoning that already does that, whether it be setbacks from neighboring properties or other aspects of the zoning code. But there's a multitude of topics that the zoning code covers, including proper setbacks for health, public safety, so forth, and topic in the zoning code.
Right, but when you're updating these ordinances, you're making it retroactive. You're making it retroactive in the sense that, let's say I bought my property, it's agriculturally zoned, I plan on selling it, and the next person that purchases it isn't gonna be able to use it, they're not gonna be able to plant grapes for wine, or they're not gonna be able to do the things that the agriculturally zoned property is zoned to do. And changing it.
Okay.
And requesting we give part of our property to land trust.
SB 1425 requires review and update by 1/1/26. Why are you starting so late?
Great question.
Yeah.
So it was passed in 2024, so you can imagine that in the course of a year, that's a short period of time. But the way in which state legislation works is they give very short, narrow windows, but there's an understanding, especially for large jurisdictions, that we need to work towards that end goal. There is not a specific end date. It's not like a time bomb where things explode or the state attorney general will come.
It says review and update by 1/1/26.
I
That sounds
understand
like
that.
an end date to me. And is that why you're really pushing this process so fast?
Not at
Because
all.
you were supposed to have compliance by 1/1/26.
Not at all, not at all. So we do have time, because if we were rushing it, we would not have this conversation. We could have proposed it at the beginning of the year. But the important process is to have the presentations, to have these discussions, because.
So, but you could have sent the letter also in 25, like you could have sent it a year ago, but you didn't. So my question is, why are you waiting for this, after the compliance date to start?
Sure. So the compliance date has nothing to do with the timing in which we had to send these letters. It's just a matter of us getting to that step, for us to be able to do our research, our work, to get us here in order to send those letters to have this conversation. So we're not out of compliance. This is part of that process, and there is not a specific end time yet for us, because this stage specifically is the most important for us.
AB 1889, section 1, paren A, close paren 3, close paren, says that California wants to conserve 30% of California land and coastal waters. With Angeles Forest sitting at 700,000 acres and LA County, Más o menos sitting at 2,587,046 acres, if you just designated Angeles Forest, that would be 27%. How much area is already in the CEA right now as it exists in Los Angeles County?
The designation, I believe, is roughly 400,000 acres of existing SEA. However, you're linking two things that are different. The 30 by 30 approach is from the state. It is not a directive for local agencies to conserve lands. That's a different approach. That 30 by 30 says lands will be conserved. This is not a conservation approach. We're not saying you have to conserve, because, yeah.
But you're saying that I'm sorry, hang on. But the authority that you're claiming that you're doing this work under is AB 1889, and 1889 only requires 30%. So why are you grabbing approximately 40% of North LA County?
So 1889 and the 30 by 30 are different things.
It's in AB 1889, section 1A3.
We can revisit the numbers, because we did not use the 30% approach. My report was about that, and that is not what we were.
Okay, well, let's go on to something more interesting. At the Rural Town Council, I gave you my email, my phone number. I heard nothing from you. And you said that you were going to connect with me with regard to why the boundary was at 68th Street and my property is at 5600. So if you go to 68th Street and you go west, you're in a carve out. But if you go east, you're in my place. And you said you would get a hold of me and you didn't.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
Well,
I apologize.
but see, this is the type of county involvement that I have experienced my entire life here. And that is no communication, no explanation, nothing. And then you guys require all of this connection and talking and planning, and then months or nothing.
I apologize. We've been doing a tour around AB. Every other day we go out to different communities. We went out to Parablossom, we
you ask for my information if you weren't gonna do it?
So ma'am, we are going to get to everybody. We have a very long queue, as you can imagine, the areas that we're covering. We're responding to numerous people every day and we're getting through that queue. So please, we do apologize, it's gonna take us some time. We have a
realize
very
what you're
small
asking of us?
team.
I have one last question. On the SEA selection criteria, the A through G, all right, I specifically would like to know why 68th Street to the west of it is out of that criteria, but what about, and I'm not kidding, I'm on Shannon Valley, on Graylock, on 2 streets east of 68th Street. I'm in 20G. So I wanna know, what about these animals, the bio-optic, I don't understand what that word means, the resting, migrating grounds, what is it that allows the carve out that's west of 68th Street? And by the way, that's also the boiling point, and not my place. How are these lines so arbitrarily created?
That's a really good question.
So they're not arbitrarily created, there is, I know.
68th Street, come on!
So, yes, the lines are drawn. There's a number of data layers that we overlaid in order to see where those boundaries lay.
None of your guys came to my area. I read the review, I read the inspection, none of them came to Shannon Valley.
So that process that you read about in the SEA process of the site verifications, those are not intended to do sites of, visits of every single site that was designated. in
They didn't go to the area.
We understand, because the data layers that are available to us, whether it be through the, state C, California Natural, yeah, lots of letters. It's a California Natural Diversity Database, so it recognizes plant species, native plant species, and then other layers that we lay on top of each other. In this research exercise, the data, particularly in areas where there is existing data, where there are multiple layers indicating that the resources are there, we didn't necessarily go to those sites back again, because those observances and the research has already been conducted, whether it's by the state or other agencies in the area.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but this is a word salad that does
It
not
is.
explain to me why west of 68 is a carve out, and all of the critters that can cross the street there, that possibly live on my side, because I'm in the SEA proposed expansion, but that's okay for them not to be, restricted there, but they're restricted in my place, and that, really insane.
So I'm gonna personally follow up with you.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Understand that, because we're not gonna memorize every single line in the boundary. We want to be able to give you that correct information and that specificity.
That was the question I asked her, and she didn't respond to you.
And I understand that, and I apologize that we couldn't get to you sooner, after May 27th, 2 weeks after. So give us until Monday, and we will follow up. As you can imagine, we are talking to at least 100 people every single day in addition to these. So I do apologize. But we did on May 27th.
You told me to wait.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, wait, excuse me, I need to cut in here, I apologize. I am very disturbed by what you just explained.
Yes.
I have carefully reviewed Appendix E, I have carefully reviewed the analyses. These comments are pertaining just to the expansion, which is what this lady's property is about. According to the county's own analysis, the expansion is intended to only enhance wildlife movement and ecological connectivity between mountain ranges. It says that the expansion does not capture unique or localized resources. It says that the expansion has no concentrated richness areas or hotspots for rare plants. It's 100% connectivity, okay? So all this CNDDB stuff is completely irrelevant, because that is not why you expanded the SCA's her property and all of our other properties.
So I
think that's very important.
And that's why, Jackie, I didn't say specifically on her property, and that's why I would like to go back to look at all of those data layers to provide that specificity, because the process in the study included a multitude of things, including for communities that are not just active, and that's why I wanted to be able to look at the computer to give her that information.
very troubling to me that county staff would be saying things along those lines to an actual resident who's in the 20G, when your own documents say that 20G expansion has nothing to do with those resources.
And I understand that, Jackie.
First of all, who started this seed in this area? Can't hear you. Who started all of this action in our area? I want to name. Who decided that this area, as opposed to forestry and everything else, why the town? To the prior people saying, oh, it's only a certain percentage, why is it now just the East Town? Why is it now this specific area that all of a sudden we decided we gotta take the town instead of all these other surrounding areas? For example, we have an active wash area that everybody takes their dirt bikes and razors and everything else that they never did for years and years. All of a sudden, when people come in and you guys aren't doing anything about that, which is actually designated as a preserve area, and nobody does anything to protect that. But now you want to go to private residents and say, well, you can't do more than 15,000 square feet, or if you're going to do anything, which is like a third of an acre. So if you have like a large property, which predominantly I think people have 2.5, 5, 10 acres in this area, why are you're basically targeting it? And that's my question. So I would like to know, I would like to know who specifically started this, and who do we talk to? What person? And by the way, I appreciate you guys being out here, and I think all meetings should be out in the local area. We shouldn't have to schlep down to LA. When they vote on things and they're gonna do all their voting and stuff, they should get out here. We shouldn't have to all go to them and try to figure out what the party is. So that would be a suggestion. So thank you for that. So, I did have a couple questions. Is sensitive resources, a lot of people said they didn't understand what some of these terms were. So when you refer to sensitive resources, can you kind of tell us in layman's terms what you mean?
Yeah, sure. The question is, what do we mean when we reference sensitive resources? Sensitive resources are locally found. They may be only able to be found in this region or in this community or in this area. Sometimes
Specify what? Plants, animals, what are you?
Sometimes the scale is different depending on that resource. So it might be very, very localized to the community. It might be localized to the region of the desert, or it might be localized to the region of Los Angeles County. So things such as the golden eagle, sparrow. We have a list of things as well too. Yeah, I can pull that up.
And would that be the same with biological resources?
Yes.
Now, what would you consider biological resources?
So,
The frogs that just showed up since we had some rain? Yeah.
biological resources is that bigger category, whether it's plants or animals. Sensitive may be that, again, localized, regional, can only be found in this general area of LA County, desert, or Acton. They may be impacted by various factors, so their population is shrinking. So those are the
Okay, and
descriptions.
wildlife permeable, you said about fences, wildlife permeable. So, I have chain link fence, so I'm not taking my chain link fence, because whatever's been around my property for 30 years, has managed to get around, okay? So, and I get a lot of stuff, and they manage to get in and out and all of that. And why are you kind of, it seems, I'm sure most people are here, they've been here. Why are you like and you're not gonna say targeting places that have been, you're saying, well, but in these guidelines, well, no, we've been here, we have not been impacting whatever you're looking for, unless you come up with a specific thing and say, this is it, we found it, and, you know, it's on your property. And I think most people kind of leave their properties, I mean, most people just don't come in, it's the newer people that come from everywhere else that come in and just, take it to the dirt. Most people
that have lived here a long time, I would expect have trees, have some brush, they clear where it's needed, they've lived here. We've gone through gazillion fires and evacuations and everything, we have a pretty good idea what we should be doing with our property. More so than the government with the Angeles Forest, but that's a horse of a different color. You said it was a discretionary process, so to me, this just seems like it's a land grab and it's a money grab. That's what it seems to me. Yes, so do you have a name of who started this SEA, who actually initiated this AB, whatever, who initiated this? You need to contact to say what, to do a follow-up. Do you have any right now?
So the folks, it's us for you to contact. So it's the Department of Regional, so we're from the Department of Regional Planning. So the question is who to contact about this. And so we are with the County Department of Regional Planning. It is a Department of Regional Planning project to respond to the state legislation.
The head of that project. Who?
It is us.
Okay, you have a boss, and they have a boss, so it had to start somewhere.
Barger.
There's a name where it started. That's
Catherine
the
Barger.
And then who is the person overseeing it now?
No,
Actually,
but
that's
she's the one that can.
Who's the name?
You are looking at her.
You are looking at
She's already
And then
responded to
how
our
did you
letter and
come
said
about
she's kicking the whole
this
thing over.
project? Did you create
So
this
what
project?
about this guy?
So the SEA program, as Iris had shown in her presentation, has been around since 1976.
Who is it?
I don't know who started that in 1976, I wasn't born yet. But this 2025 iteration, it is a direct response to the two pieces of legislation. The SEA program since 1976 focuses on resource protection, and thus it is a direct response to the legislation because we have different definitions already.
Okay, so I understand that. So how can you try to work with us to try to do and care for the areas that we already have established? Okay, the Action Wash area, there's another big swath of property, and why don't you guys try to, rather than trying to go after the people that have private property, why don't you try to acquire the vacant lands that are for sale, and then make those natural areas and have the county maintain those?
Yeah, that's great feedback. Please send those comments, we want to hear that. In terms of enforcement, in the 5th district, there's only, complaint-based enforcement in the 5th supervisorial district. We don't have enforcement officers going and driving around properties, scanning properties for violations.
Right, but you have biologists, and you have all these other entities that are willing to go after the individuals. But then you don't want to put in the resources to keep the natural areas that we already have. Okay. So, okay.
I have no voice, I'll do the best I can do. I have two questions, one's quite specific, one's quite general. Which would you like to hear?
Let's do general first. So maybe it might apply to the whole
So
other.
the general one is water. We have to dig trenches because of the way the rain is changing to drain our properties. We're not gonna ask for permits to do that because we don't want our houses to flood. We're on hillsides, there are mudslides, we need to be able to trench. And I understand that what this says, but our reality is that we live here and we need to take care of our land and our homes and our people. The second part of water is wells. We are on a shared well. The shared well is a 4-way well share. I will accept all your apologies later. It's just disasters. But wells are going dry in that. And so there is a need to drill more wells to get water if it's even possible. So if it were possible to exempt the drilling of personal water wells from the SCA, I think that would go a significant way to helping us feel as if you understand where we live and what we live with. We shouldn't have to apply for more expensive permits to drill a well when one has gone dry.
And that was your specific?
No, that was
all in general. Okay.
So many of us are on wells. The specific thing is that we live up the end of Peaceful Valley Road, and I will tell you, we have wildlife come through. And so I understand why it's important to have part of our land, but we own 2 parcels. Our house is on one, and our chicken coop and all our beehives and the sheds that contain the equipment for the chickens and the beehives. We're not doing plowing because we don't have very much water, but we do have livestock. And that is important to keeping the biological diversity. We actually bought our first beehive when the native beehive on our lake died. And we thought, okay, we have all these flowers that need to get fertilized. We're now up to 5. There will be more. But when we got our letter, it referred to that land as vacant, even though there's a housing pad on it. And the shared well, the 4-way well share, is on what we were informed was vacant land. That was news to us. It's not vacant. And so, how do I get that designation changed? That's the specific question. How do I get that designation?
So for everybody, there are 2 questions. One general question about water and water wells, and trenching. In order to divert and capture drainage, rainwater, and such. So I'm going to answer that question about trenching for diverting water courses and such. So if that's something that you're already managing on your property, similar to the road, and you're, again, resurfacing and such, we're, again, not retroactively coming in and requesting a permit. Are there circumstances in which you're having to trench new routes off of your property regularly? Okay. So, provide that comment to us about circumstances that require you to continually trench different parts of your land to get water off in different directions. In terms of the exploratory drilling for wells, that level of specificity is great. Thank you. Like, that's very helpful to us. And we'll make sure to capture that comment and reassess it in the ordinance for action. And then the specificity about the vacant parcel designation. So we don't designate anything as vacant. Maybe the wording in that notice was, could have been improved, but we wouldn't be designating anything vacant. It's that it is or it is not. That's handled by the assessor's office. They acknowledge whether it's vacant or if it's not vacant.
But, yes, and I understand that, but for the sake of the SCA, there's already a housing pad there. There's already buildings there, there's already livestock there. So if in the future we decide to build there, we aren't impacting anything that is not already impacted. And so for me, it would be reasonable, so for our 20 acres, I think we got a half an acre that is excluded. And all I'm asking is for another half acre for the second section of the land. I'm not asking for the whole thing. I'm just saying, you know, we've already opened it significantly. So there's
already a housing pad on it, you know, we recommend you build on that housing pad. You probably are gonna go through a ministerial process with the services that are already there. So I'm gonna, since we possibly have a long line still, we can speak about the specifics of the property. We will take down your information if you have supervisors.
Could you speak up, please? We want to hear you.
Melissa, 6 months pregnant, so I'm gonna.
Maybe somebody else can read it. Somebody else can read it.
Oh, no, I'm good, thank you. I appreciate it though. All right, I am a resident and homeowner of Acton. I am here today to formally oppose the 2025 significant ecological area expansion as applied to residential, rural, and agricultural zoned property. I am asking that this expansion be rescinded immediately. Let me be specific about what you're imposing on these constituents in this room and our communities, and continue to ignore and are planning to bury under a mountain of regulatory burdens and regressive policies. According to your own ordinance drafts and fee structures, regardless of how many acres a rural property holds, the proposed expansion reduces their entire buildable footprint to 15,000 square feet, which is equal to 1/3 of an acre, the size of a suburban lot. For comparison, the minimum acreage requirement for our CSD Acton is 1 acre, 2 acres in Agua Dulce. My own property is 10 acres. Anything utilized beyond the 1/3 acre footprint requires a conditional use permit with fees starting at $25,512 before biological review costs averaging $5,000 and mitigation fees additionally. That permitting process applies to new barns, fences, sheds, orchards, ADUs, grading, and routine agricultural improvements. These costs are combined amount to over 25% of the average household income of Acton and the greater California 27th district. It also effectively leaves most properties in our area with less than 33% usable land and just 3% of my own property exempted from these regressive policies. This property is something my family worked and saved decades for. As a younger person, you can relate to the extreme costs we have to overcome to purchase a home that we want. This property is where I plan to teach my children how to grow their own food sustainably and enjoy this outdoors. This is all now essentially unattainable, particularly when in tandem with rising insurance and inflation. This is not regulation, it is a de facto ban on rural land use of working and middle-class families by making it financially and bureaucratically unattainable. Without compensation for effectively unusable property, it directly violates the reasonable use commitment your own seed program guidelines publicly promise to uphold, and contradicts existing zoning in our A1, A2 zone communities according to LA County's own general plan, Title 22, and existing land use protections. While individual homeowners face these costs and red tape, commercial developers and best battery storage operators, including projects in the vicinity of the Southern California Edison Vincent substation, an area that was conveniently omitted from the Pro-C map, are receiving exemptions and expedited treatment unavailable to working families in this room. I want that disparity clearly stated to the record, as it was on the Association of Rural Town Council meeting on May 27th of this year by yourselves. You have prioritized commercial development over working families. That was stated. This policy does not protect ecosystems. It protects well-resourced commercial interests at the direct expense of the rural working class. It is no secret that our community is also in a high fire district, along with the many communities affected by this proposed ordinance. For residents who may, or now or in the future, have to rebuild after a wildfire, communities like Juniper Hills still fighting to rebuild 6 years after the Bobcat fire. This proposed expansion will make rebuilding legally impractical, and financially impossible for most citizens affected. Homeowners further stretched financially who are now prohibited, wary, or unwilling to maintain and invest in their properties will accumulate vegetation and effectively allow their properties to deteriorate. Fire risk will increase, not decrease. Look for yourselves at the existing SCA zoning along Soledad Canyon Road, titled the Santa Clara River SCA Zone between Acton and Santa Clarita. It is riddled with unmaintained properties and facilities and invasive plant life. This land was not actually meaningfully protected by its SDA ordinance or designation. The result of this policy was not ecological preservation, it was displacement. This is a refugee crisis of the county's own making that you are now trying to expand into our homes and communities. I'm formally requesting that the Board of Supervisors and the Department of Regional Planning take the following actions. Immediately rescind and void this expansion as applied to all occupied residential, rural, and agricultural properties. Distinguish between individual private landowners and corporate developers in both policy and practice. Stop extending exceptions to commercial interests that you categorically deny to working rural families. Honor existing community standards district protections rather than burying them under contradictory new regulations. Close the loopholes allowing commercial developers and utility operators to bypass the community and environmental standards everyone else must follow. Treat the January 2025 fires as the mandate that they are, to streamline and support rebuilding after fires and crises, not obstruct it further for all homeowners of LA County. Lastly, engage with your constituents directly, respectfully, and transparently. The initial outreach letter informed residents, many of them elderly or with limited resources, that this would be, quote, the only letter they would receive during this project. That is not an acceptable communication from a county government to its tax-paying citizens.
Agreed.
It is dismissive, it is inadequate, it is contributing to the bipartisan distrust of all government and regulatory bodies that is growing across this country and region. We are property owners, families, farmers, ranchers, and stewards of our land. We are old and young, racially and socioeconomically diverse, we're liberal and conservative, taxpayers and equal constituents of this county. These families, burdened by this proposed expansion, help fund this county while we maintain our own roads, our own wells, our own septic system, our own fire prevention without county subsidy or assistance. We are not asking for special treatment. We are asking you to honor the commitments you have already made to us in your own governing documents. Rescind this expansion, do it now, do it before LA County is forced to defend itself in court as we defend what we hold dearest, our homes, our rights, and our future.
One
I'm on the last call.
Lawyer, county.
When you're opposing this C, please oppose not only the new expansion, but the C ordinance itself, because previously they exempted single family residences.
Okay.
Well, actually, I'll start there. So in 2015, they expanded the SCA to encompass almost 33% of that. That was okay, because the existing SCA ordinance was reasonable. It didn't have all of these ridiculous things in it. Then 3 years later, they adopted the new SCA ordinance with these guidelines, with all of these, consider not takes, their takes. So these 50%, you disturb an acre, you have to give up an acre. So you're 1 for 1. And I also want to point out, just so you're aware of this, that we fought this at the town council bitterly and did not win. If your biologist looks at your property and decides, I don't see a horny toad, San Diego Coast Corn Lizard, Langvillia, you've heard of them? I don't see one on your property, but I think your property could support one, then you are a category 2. And you give, what is it, there's 66%. It's not 1-to-1 anymore, it's 2-to-1. And so they don't actually have to observe the species that would put you into the category. The biologist just has to say, well, I think it could live here, so, just be aware of that. So we've already addressed the issue about the expansion, again, these comments pertain to the expansion, right? 20G, it's intended solely for wildlife connectivity, no special species, no nothing, all right? So then if we go down and we look, it's on page 100 of the SCA study, these are the justifications for the expansion. First, protect rock outcrops scattered throughout the sub-area, providing nesting habitat for raptors. There's no justification for including active in that, because property owners here develop around rock outcroppings. You can't develop a rock outcropping, that takes dynamite. So if you, regional planning, feels it's important to protect rock outcroppings, then just write a rock outcropping protection ordinance. We will live with that, okay? And don't take half of our property. The other, second justification is something called the western extent of Mojave Desert flora and fauna transitioning towards the coastal slope. This is not sufficient because the SCA designation in the study points out that there is nothing unique or important or rare about the flora and fauna in the expanded SCA area. So that justification is meaningless. The third justification was active wash and associated drainages and slopes. However, the active wash is not even in the expansion area, it's already protected in the SCA. Furthermore, drainage courses cannot be touched because property owners are not permitted to change the location or volume of flows on or off their property under state law. So if a property owner impermissibly changes the drainage course, you don't need the SCA to fix it, the county enforcement just needs to come in and do their job, which they need to do. The last justification is large contiguous open space area connecting the Liebres, Sierra Pelona, and San Gabriel Mountains. So I would like to ask, what large open space areas are connecting the Sierra Pelonas to the San Gabriels? There are none, because there's a freeway in the way, all right? So the connection does not exist. Our large undeveloped parcels that are in the San Gabriels are already in the SCA. And if you want to put some of the large undeveloped parcels in the Sierra Pelonas into an SCA, well, perhaps we can talk about that. But that's not what you're proposing. What you're proposing is to put land that is neither in the Sierra Pelonas or in the, San Gabriels, based on an erroneous claim that these properties link the two ranges. There's a freeway in the way, okay? There is no linkage. In fact, your own SCA document says the critical linkages are Aguadulce County Road and then some, well, further down Santa Clarita. There's no justification for any of this in active. So if you want to, because there's the only wildlife movement concern you could possibly have for the areas that you've expanded the SCA into would be with impenetrable perimeter fencing. So if that's the issue, why don't you work with us on an ordinance that requires an inexpensive minor CUP for such fencing, wherein the property owner can explain why they need a fence, if they've got 10 acres of livestock they're gonna run, or 10 acres of olive trees they wanna plant, or whatever. And then work with you to accommodate the fencing so that the wildlife corridor can be made. You don't need to put us into all of us into an SEA, you can just do a simple fencing ordinance if you need to. The description of the Santa Clara River SEA on pages 179 to 185 of Appendix E, that's your new Appendix E, which is the basis for all of this, does not provide any justification for the expanded SEA. In fact, it explicitly states on page 185 that the critical linkage is east-west, not north-south, not Kelowna to San Gabriel, that's inactive. It also identifies the important north-south linkages as being in Agua-Dulce and Santa Clarita. So now, I'm going to move on to the next issue. So those are suggestions, please. Don't put us in an SEA. Let's talk about a outcropping protective ordinance, whatever. So acting has never, ever, ever been considered a linkage or wildlife corridor. It was never identified as a linkage or wildlife corridor in the South Coast Wildlands Study. It was certainly not deemed to be a linkage in the general plan in 2015. And now you've created a new SEA category for land that provides, quote, functionally important habitat connectivity for, quote, individual movements for mating and migration and, quote, species range contractions. Since the whole sole basis for the SEA expansion in Acton is connectivity, you need to prove that nearly all of Acton, which is what's now in the expanded area, is essential for mating, migration, and species range contraction before you can expand the SEA boundaries into those areas. No such proof exists. I've read every page that you guys have posted on this study, and it doesn't exist. In fact, and this is really important, the areas in Acton that you have identified as functionally important habitat for connectivity, like Crown Valley area, Shannon Valley area, Peaceful Valley, Omiso Canyon, they're already substantially developed, with low-density rural residences placed between the Sierra Colonas and the San Gabriels. This clearly proves that low-density rural development does not and will not interfere with wildlife movement. So the very fact that you put them in places that are already developed in rural development, and you're calling it an important linkage, means that rural development has not interrupted that. So you really have no basis for this expansion. Really disturbing. Yeah. In other words, by declaring these developed rural areas, such as Shannon Valley, Crown Valley, so on, to be functionally important for habitat connectivity, you are expressly acknowledging that rural residential development has not degraded habitat connectivity. Therefore, connectivity and linkage is not a basis to put these lands into an SEA expansion. Let's see. So we talked about the biological constraints analysis. And we talked about the taking, and Iris and I had a conversation, and she agreed, there is a one-to-one requirement, even for ministerial, if you deserve it and disturb more than whatever, 5,000, 15,000. Another issue unrelated to this, but it's still part of the concern, the CNR element must address scenic drives, which are what define scenic resources in the AD area plan. Because the CNR element governs scenic resources in section 7, it must be expanded to address the scenic drives that are in the AD area plan that we are relying on to protect ourselves against a bunch of development, including a lot of the best. So please do that as well. Page 5 of the CNR points to the PNA Plus data-driven Parks and Recs analysis as an essential foundation for identifying priority areas of conservation. That's one of the reasons you stated here that it has to be. And when you look at the PNA Plus analysis, Acton is not identified for any of those areas. So that there's no justification there anyway. Anyway, so that's what I have for now.
Is there any response to that?
Yeah, you know what, are you the county representative?
Yes.
Okay, so let me ask you,
Why do I have to pay property taxes? What do you give me for my property taxes?
So I can answer the questions. Well, it sounded like they were comments that will be submitted by Jackie on the project. Are there any that you'd like me to, there were quite a bit, so I wanted to also get to everybody's questions, but
Sure, how about that the developed areas are not disrupting habitat changes, right? Because you're important communities, like you might identify. So why do you need to take all these people's property if in the name of habitat?
yeah, so that's a very fair question, and the South Coast Wildlands, study, so there was a study conducted a long time ago by a different environmental group, outside and unrelated to the county that focused on, wildlife connectivity corridors specifically. That study, it was a while ago.
2008.
50.
So, that study did focus on large, animal movement. So when we talked about bears, mountain lions and such, that was kind of the focus of that study. So it was very specific, it's very linear. This is a little more comprehensive. Yes, it addresses beyond just apex predators. Now, when we talk about east-west, it's not exactly linearly, longitudinally, latitudinally east-west.
Why not?
There is mountain ranges that go diagonally. That essentially establishes that kind of east-west direction. There is a break in the mountains, and essentially Agua Dulce, Acton, the pass through Vincent Grade serves as that connectivity towards these two mountain ranges. So it is broader in scope between the species and the direction that we're talking about. And the legislation is, through AB 1889, has us look at how development has historically and going forward may impact the movement. I hear you.
Your analysis though doesn't look at that, doesn't address that. There's no section how development in Acton or wherever on your expansion areas has adversely affected connectivity.
And it's looking at the development patterns within communities. So, again, certainly we welcome the comments that you have on the approach to designating the SCAs, using the criteria and the ordinance itself. I heard some very specific things that can be helpful, especially with the CNR comments.
Well, I looked at your actual criteria and none of them apply. That's the problem. I mean, other than rock outcropping, which is not even linked.
So we'll take those comments, and we will look at and provide you with some more detail as you requested.
Okay, I was on the town council for 6 years, and our goal was to protect our CSTs. And during that time, we found that the planning department didn't do a very good job of compliance. And we worked really hard to make sure that the planning department started to pay attention to our CSTs. And I see a lot of inconsistencies in what you're proposing with this. And my question is did you look at our CSTs to see if there's any way that what you're proposing is going to conflict with this? Especially, I'm an architect, and I see it all the time. One agency says, oh, you can't do that, or we want you to do this, and the other agency says, no, that's in violation with, let's say, planning and grading and drainage. Did you look at our CSTs to see if there's, some sort of consistency between your suggested plan?
Yeah, so it's all housed within the zoning code, which Department of Regional, so the question was whether or not there is consistency between the various regulations to make sure that there isn't any conflict when you go to request permits. Yes, so everything that we've discussed this evening and the CSD is housed in the zoning code. And we looked at the vegetation requirements, we acknowledge that there are some differences, and yes, we have acknowledged that.
Okay, but you also, are you acknowledging that there is inconsistencies? Because even the fencing ordinance for Acton is not what you guys are proposing with this SEA.
We understand that. There are some changes that are being proposed, in order to address the legislation, and to further, to be able to implement the SEA ordinance itself. So, yes, we acknowledge that there are differences, and we're happy to take
another problem. 15,000 square feet for CAD development or whatever for your house. The county requires net zero drainage on your property from solid surfaces, which then basically requires some sort of dry sump area, which requires grading. When you add all that in plus a house, you're already gonna hit the 15,000, which is now gonna trigger an additional CUP type thing, which is, as somebody else suggested, $25,000 plus a biology report. How does the county justify that kind of expense to the average citizen or person that lives in Acton?
So, again, I think it goes to the details of what's required of the net zero.
Okay, but fuel modification zone, that's included in this, well, according to your plan that I understand here, that's, you know, part of that 15,000 square feet. And then you've got, so fuel modification, then you've got the fire department telling you to clear another 200 to 300 feet around it. I mean, why does that have to be all included? Now, if the fire department, vegetation is not part of it, removal of vegetation, well then how come fuel modification isn't eliminated from this footprint?
Again, that could be part of the proposal to account for all of the unique circumstances that Acton Main Base is developing a vacant parcel. So telling us, the net zero drainage, what I heard was also the drainage, diversion, it sounds like. So I'm hearing a few different things though. I'm hearing about net zero drainage, and then I heard somebody else say that there's diverting drainage off the property. So again, I'm hearing kind of conflicting things.
Well, new development requires net zero drainage. Okay, so that is another area that's gonna get graded, and suddenly it just kicks you into the next phase or, you know, review by the county. That's really expensive. Why should we have to pay for that?
My bioswales can be 3,000 square feet.
Easily.
So it can be, but is it typically? And does it depend on the footprint and the pad of the size of
See,
the house?
this is one agency telling you gotta do this, and another agency saying, oh, now they triggered us to charge you another $25,000. Come on. Why is the county doing this?
I hear you.
Why does there have to be a charge anyway? There's fees.
Yeah.
The charge is just a money grab. The charge is really. That's it.
So there's already
No,
fees
that's it.
for. There's already
If you're requiring us to do something, why do you need to charge us a fee for doing
There
it?
already is a fee for permits. There are no, free permits in the county.
No, but the price of the permit is not what we're talking about. Can you elaborate on that, because you brought that up?
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Abigail and I'm not from here. I'm from the other side of the valley and we're facing the same problem. We will be hosting these people on Zoom next Wednesday night. So for you who didn't get to speak, please join us there. In the meantime, seeing I trucked all the way out here to do this, I would like to thank this council for, you know, supplying this potential for everyone here. It is a very hostile conversation, and we deal with these things as well. But I would like to start with why on earth does LA County think they can handle even more permitting? They can't rebuild Eaton from the Eaton fire. This department is clearly overworked. Right, so hey, how many of you have the invasive mustard plants on your, you know, and you have to clear them. Aren't they? They're super invasive and they are pushing out good native stuff like my California buckwheat. I protect those real well. So we are pushing them out. How many of you watch the news or social media and see like the bear that just got run over on the 126 or was playing in the back of one of the Santa Paula houses or Fillmore, and all of course the big beautiful cougars, our cougars are getting killed, but they're not getting killed out here. They're getting killed in suburbia. They're getting killed in the urban areas. These people, myself included in our area, we are the custodians of your land. Amen. That you're holding yours. We are the keepers of these animals. We are the keepers of our native plants. We are your aid to make this happen. Don't punish us. Thank you.
So, first off, will existing fencing, walls, periphery, barriers, will those be grandfathered in these areas? If you have chain link, walls, whatever?
Will existing fencing be grandfathered in? Essentially, yes. If you have a fence now, we're not asking you to take it out. If you need to replace with the exact same fence, you can do that without coming in for an additional permit from us.
And also, so land clearing for those, there's a couple of lots here, a lot of people have, the majority of their property just down to bare earth. That won't have to be remediated or replanted or anything, but the way it is now, before this goes into effect, it can stay that way?
So if the land is already cleared now, does it need to be remediated if or when this ordinance becomes effective? No, the ordinance is not retroactive. It does not require to go back and remediate the land prior to an effective date if it is adopted.
The question that come up earlier about water wells. So will new water wells have to go through the approval process through an SEA?
So usually, the question is, are exploratory wells required to go through the SCA permitting process? I think there's a little bit of a nomenclature, we should have used the exact same consistent language, but there's the SCA review, there's permits. So it's a lot of jargon, like you said, but ostensibly for an exploratory well, it does require a permitting process, yes, for exploratory wells. So we can take that feedback if there's feedback and comments about that process that's being proposed.
If this does go through, when will it go into effect? When will be the start date where we have to meet all these guidelines?
It is 30 days after the Board of Supervisors adopts it.
Is there a proposed date of?
So basically, what you're saying is with all our comments and everybody not agreeing with the ordinance, you guys, the board, you guys are basically still go on ahead.
So this is the process. We're hearing out Acton. We're hearing out a lot of different communities within the Antelope Valley and other portions of the county as well too. So it's a process. We need to figure out what those next steps are after receiving the comments.
How's been the other meetings? Been good? Been positive?
Different. We've had a lot of folks in different communities share the same perspective. We've gotten some comments via email in support of as well too.
Well, why should you be the judge? I mean, I buy my property, and you tell me what to do?
Will there be any exceptions?
Hey, ask my question, please.
Will there be any exemptions for animal husbandry, for like the fencing, or for buildings or any facilities put in for animal husbandry? Or will it have to go through the same process for all that?
So with the, there's a slide where Iris was explaining that for animal keeping where they're like corrals and such, no, you don't need an additional permit, nor will that count towards that VSA population.
Animal permeable fencing doesn't work well for keeping animals.
Understood. Or if you have large barns that exceed the VSA, then potentially.
Wait a minute, are you saying I could put in like a huge corral, like strip a 5-acre parcel, make it a corral, and it's exempt from this SEA ordinance? I don't think so.
Don't be letting the secrets out.
I mean, this is a total different from what we got before.
I just asked this lady that question.
Will this-
The fence around it, and the horses are rented as a pasture? Yes.
Yes.
Will this affect mineral rights and mining? Like if you have the mineral rights on your property, I know that this is, sort of, you guys are kind of taking control of the resources. So will this affect property owners' mineral rights?
It doesn't affect your rights or your access to it, but if you're going to be mining the rights, is that the question? Like an activity associated with it, or just the rights in and of itself?
Which would be literal access to it.
So again, if it exceeds that threshold of more than 15,000 square feet and some of the development standards, there are two different permitting processes, and that permitting process already exists now, it's just which, process you choose.
So, do you know if this will affect, there you go. I'll narrow this down now. Let's see. Are these gonna be hard line, must not exceed, or, you know, or must comply, or is this just an additional approval process that can be taken on a case-by-case basis for, well, really for all the rules on there, you know, for the animal permeable fencing, or the 15,000 square feet, are these hard line shall not exceed, or is it just an additional approval that could possibly be justified for larger lot densities in certain applications, or, you know, whatever it may be?
So, the proposal right now are those numbers, that are provided. But if, there could be a proposal from the community that scales. So if that's a suggestion, we'll take that comment in.
So as of right now, they're gonna be hard line, we're just debating on where that line is gonna be.
Yes,
ADUs with the state mandated shall issue, ADUs, is that going to have an exemption to this?
yes, so all, state permitted, ADUs in general that fall within those state parameters are exempt from this process.
I think it's really the last important one that I have on here is, will this affect, any fire hazard classifications? Is there any thoughts that maybe that might be increased, being that the general area is going to be doing less land clearing and things of that nature?
No, because very explicitly it says that defensible space, is exempt from this process. That there's no, further permitting that's being required to do that. So follow the notice that you received from the fire department.
I only have one left on my list, and that's, will this affect hunting and trapping? Like, is it gonna turn into almost like a preserve, where there won't be any hunting in the area, or?
We don't regulate hunting of species. We hope that they're not endangered ones, but, no.
That would be illegal if it is.
Yeah, this ordinance doesn't regulate hunting.
That's all I have.
Okay, I'd like to point out something here. Corrals, paddocks, and non-structural animal keeping areas are only exempt if they are in category 5. All the land in Acton, with the exception of Bloom Ranch and a couple of olive grape places, are category 4. So they will not be under, this is your ordinance, it will not be exempt.
And you've confirmed that all lands in Acton are category 4.
But your own documents say that, most of it is all just untouched habitat, but it's not valuable.
What are the parameters for category 5?
Category 5 is disturbed or previously used agricultural land or has non-native species on it.
Most of us in Acton are
Right?
disturbed.
No.
What is unincorporated in Acton? I have an Acton address, but I'm looking at everything. It's all unincorporated.
Illegal regulatory taking means according to the United States Constitution. Illegal regulatory taking, that's what's going on.